At 2:30 in the morning on March 28, 1971, the base mascot started barking at something in the darkness below the wire. Nobody paid attention. 2 hours later, 50 enemy sappers were already inside the perimeter of Firebase Marianne. Their bodies were coated in grease and charcoal dust. They carried satchel charges in their hands, AK-47s at the ready. What followed was a deadly attack on a single American firebase in the entire Vietnam War. 33 dead, 83 wounded, all in roughly 30 minutes. But Firebase Marianne wasn't unique. It was just the worst example of what 8,000 American firebases faced every single night for 8 years. This is what life was actually like inside those circles of sandbags and red dirt. In order to fully understand what these soldiers experienced, you first need to understand why firebases existed at all. Vietnam was a war with no front lines. The enemy could be anywhere, which meant American forces needed to be everywhere. The firebase was the answer to that equation. A typical firebase measured just 200 to 300 meters in diameter. Picture a couple of football fields carved into a jungle hilltop. At its center sat howitzers, arranged in a star formation for 360-degree coverage. Around 200 to 300 men lived inside this perimeter. One artillery battery with roughly 100 artillerymen. One infantry company with 100 to 150 troops, plus engineers, medics, and communications personnel. Construction happened fast. An engineer would drive a center stake into the ground. A 40-meter rope established the base radius. Using an aiming circle, stakes were placed every 15 degrees to mark 24 bunker positions. A helicopter then delivered a standard package to each position. One 15-pound shaped demolition charge to blow the initial hole. 2 sheets of pierced steel planking, and a bundle of sandbags. By nightfall of the first day, the defending company was dug in with complete overhead cover. The M102 105mm howitzer was the Firebase workhorse. Lightweight enough to be transported by Chinook helicopter, capable of hurling shells 11 kilometers into the jungle. Larger bases mounted 155mm howitzers with even greater range. The American military expended more than 7 million tons of munitions on targets in Vietnam. During the Khe Sanh siege alone, defenders fired over 158,900 artillery rounds. But all of that firepower couldn't change what life was actually like for the young men who lived inside these circles of sandbags and concertina wire. Commander Jerry D. Morlock, who served at Firebase Mod in 1972, captured the daily reality in 2 words: same-o, same-o. A typical day began at 0400 with stand 2, every man at his fighting position until first light. Then came the work details: filling sandbags, repairing bunkers, laying concertina wire, clearing fields of fire, the never-ending expansion of perimeter defenses. Sergeant J. Fred Waterman of the 4th Battalion, 12th Infantry remembered it clearly. When we were not on patrol, we provided security for fire bases. During the day, there were always work details like filling sandbags, building bunkers, laying wire. Sleeping arrangements ranged from crude fighting positions to more elaborate constructions using pure steel planking and ammunition crates. Jim Richardson of the 196th Infantry Brigade described his quarters at Firebase Marianne. 3 of us lived in a small bunker on the hill's southern perimeter. It was hardly big enough for us to turn around in. We slept in hammocks over a floor made out of wooden ammunition crates in order to keep ourselves safe from the rats that live between the boxes. Remote fire bases depended entirely on helicopter resupply. Hot meals were rare luxuries. Sergeant Waterman stated bluntly, "We never had hot meals. We ate C rations and freeze-dried LRRP rations exclusively." Now, some C rations were notoriously dated. Soldiers at Firebase Pace complained they were required to eat C rations dated 1949. Troops heated their meals using small chunks of C4 plastic explosive, which burns with intense focused heat. Water was often foul-tasting and masked with Kool-Aid powder. Firebase sanitation was primitive at best. Latrines consisted of wooden platforms over sawed-off 55-gallon drums. All that waste was disposed of through the universally dreaded burning detail. David A. Wilson left one of the war's most vivid accounts. We poured gasoline into the sawed-off 55-gallon drums of waste. We then lit long sections of toilet paper and dropped them into the barrels. The chaplain's assistant always mentioned Dante's Inferno at the point that the foul-smelling plume of smoke shot upward toward the Vietnamese heavens. And then there were the rats. Commander Morlock described nightly battles at Firebase Mod. Our nights were mostly spent repelling the constant assaults of those hordes of voracious rats that erupted soon after the sun set out of the vast, years-accumulated heaps of trash and garbage surrounding the Firebase. Soldiers in Firebase Tomahawk reported something even worse. These rats have a tunnel complex under this place. It's a real terror at night. They climb in bed with you looking for food. One artilleryman from the 572nd Transportation Company recalled their improvised solution. Rats as big as cats would come into our sandbag bunkers. We removed the bullet and plugged it around into a bar of GI soap. The soap rounds splattered and stopped them. The Firebase's defining terror was indirect fire. Mortar and rocket attacks could come at any hour, often without warning. Staff Sergeant Dave Roger of Charlie Troop, 1st of the 9th Cavalry, recalled his arrival at Phuc Vinh. When I first arrived, mortar attacks were quite different. It seemed like we got hit at least 3 times a day, and Charlie had our company area zeroed in. At the Marine Combat Base at Khe Sanh, defenders endured up to 1,000 shells and rockets per day. On the siege's first morning, artillery hit the main ammunition dump, destroying 90% of stored rounds. Roger described the experience as one of the most helpless feelings he had at Vietnam, hoping the next rocket wouldn't be a direct hit. An incoming round exploding is a noise forever embedded in your brain, and for years to come you could be affected by similar sounds. The 122mm Soviet-made rocket was particularly feared. War correspondent Richard Boyle, sheltering at Firebase Pace during the 1972 Easter Offensive, wrote about the terror. We dove into a safer underground bunker as more shells hit around us. A candle flickered as about 8 of us stretched out on air mattresses, hoping the bunker wouldn't take a direct hit from a rocket. 3 sandbags may stop a mortar round, but a rocket can cut clear through a bunker with ease. But the most terrifying threat came from NVA Sappers. These elite special forces units spent weeks reconnoitering target fire bases. The terrain was minutely analyzed. Defensive patrol patterns were studied. Crew-served weapons positions plotted. On attack night, sappers stripped to shorts, coated their bodies in grease and charcoal dust, and crawled through defensive wire carrying satchel charges, RPGs, and AK-47s. The terror was intimate. At Firebase 6-shooter in 1969, Marine First Lieutenant Paul Busetti saw a hand reach in from the darkness, pull back the canvas cover, and toss a huge stick grenade with a sputtering fuse through the entrance of a small sandbag-walled bunker. He later said he thought it was over. He escaped barefoot and shirtless just before the grenade exploded. At Firebase Cunningham in the Ashaw Valley that same year, an officer came face to face with one of the sappers. The Marine had a grenade in his hand but was too close to use it. He leaped onto the surprised enemy soldier and bludgeoned him to death with the heavy base of the grenade. Even Vietnamese sappers felt the fear. One captured document noted that even experienced sappers were known to tremble when worming their way through a firebase's inner wire. They were completely vulnerable there. Now back over to Firebase Marianne. At 0230 on March 28, 1971, approximately 50 sappers from the 409th VC Main Force Battalion slipped through the wire without alerting a single sentry. The base epitomized the late war Army's disintegration. Drug abuse, combat refusals, and racial strife plagued the garrison. No armed guards had been posted at the Tactical Operations Center. Captain Paul Spielberg emerged into a cloud of tear gas. He was stunned to hear the fire of AK-47s and the crash of RPGs from inside the base's perimeter. In amazement, he watched as numerous small figures darted cat-like among the spreading flames. One soldier thought his best chance of survival was to feign death in the open. As he held his breath, he could feel an NVA sapper rifling through his pockets. He felt him strip off his wristwatch. A haunting detail from the afternoon before the attack. The base mascot dog suddenly bristled and began barking and growling at something downslope, a warning that nobody heeded. The subsequent investigation traced failures to division command level. The battalion, brigade, and division commanders were all relieved of duty. Military historian Keith Nolan called it the U.S. Army's most blatant and humiliating defeat in Vietnam. The cumulative psychological toll of Firebase life was devastating and enduring. The National Vietnam Veterans Readjustment Study conducted in 1988 found that over 30% of Vietnam theater veterans experienced PTSD at some point. A follow-up study conducted between 2010 and 2013 found 11% of male veterans still had PTSD. Among those with the highest combat exposure, 28% were still suffering as of 1990. Retired Chief Master Sergeant Billy Vaughn described the persistent state. "I didn't know what was wrong with me, just constantly on edge and uneasy, watching doorways, back to the war all the time. Somebody drops the plate and I'd be like a shot." Every soldier knew his exact departure date. The DEROS system, date of expected return from overseas, shaped every soldier's psychology. Richard Boyle observed the short-timer mentality at Firebase pace. Hooker, like all the other grunts, counted off each day left in Nam. Some carved notches on the bunker, others wrote it on their helmets. Every man knew how many days short he was. The grunts are scared most when they first arrive and when they're short. Veteran advisor John Paul Vann captured the tragedy of this rotation system. The United States has not been in Vietnam for 9 years, but for 1 year, 9 times. New arrivals were called Fings. The veterans kept them at emotional distance, unwilling to bond with somebody who might die through inexperience. As DEROS approached, short-timers became intensively risk-averse, sometimes refusing patrols entirely. The war became an individualized event for each man. His war began the day he arrived and ended the day that he left. Soldiers coped through dark humor, brotherhood, substances, and superstition. Drug abuse was endemic. A 1973 Department of Defense study found American forces used 225 million tablets of amphetamines between 1966 and 1969. 43% of servicemen reported using heroin at some point. But small comforts mattered too. The beloved poncho liner, nicknamed the Whoopie, was perhaps the single most treasured piece of equipment. One veteran claimed his had outlasted several marriages. It served as blanket, pillow, hammock, and psychological comfort in a hostile world. Jerry Lyons of the 199th Light Infantry Brigade summarized his survival philosophy. Stay alert, do things right, have faith, and don't dwell on the bad stuff. Decades later, the bonds endured. Time has not dimmed the camaraderie we shared, Lyons reflected. The stories flow like water, or should I say beer. The Firebase concept evolved through 4 distinct phases, mirroring the war itself. In 1965 and 1966, the 1st Cavalry Division pioneered bases intended to move every 2 days. Rapid, flexible, lethal. By 1967 and 1968, Firebases had matured into semi-permanent fortifications supporting large-scale operations. 1969 and 70 saw Firebase Ripcord become the last major battle between U.S. ground forces and the NVA. Located in the Ashaw Valley, this firebase endured a 23-day siege that killed 75 Americans, a battle the Nixon administration deliberately hid from the American public. Danny Kirkman, an 18-year-old radio operator drafted 1 month out of high school, recalled the worst moment. A helicopter was shot down right above the ammo dump. It was like the whole top of the hill was coming off. The final phase from 1971 to 73 saw Vietnamization transfers to South Vietnamese forces, transfers that often ended badly. Firebase 6, Firebase Fuller, and multiple bases along Rocket Ridge were overrun after handover. The arc from Firebase Bill in 1965 to Firebase Marianne in 1971 mirrors the war's own trajectory, from confident innovation to exhausted disintegration. The same tactical concept, the same red dirt and sandbags, but an utterly transformed army and nation on either end. More than 58,000 American names are etched on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington. Countless thousands of those men spent their final months, weeks, or even days inside of a Firebase perimeter. Navy Corpsman Dan Doyle, who survived the 77-day siege at Khe Sanh with a 60% casualty rate in his unit, reflected decades later, those 77 days have etched themselves into our memories. Though we've grown old, the faces of our friends who fell there remain eternally young. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. We cover the untold stories of the Vietnam War every single week.